thank you everyone for joining us this evening. As I mentioned in the earlier session, if you joined for the workshop, it was really pleasing to see the diversity of people here today. We've got people from local councils, state government, developers, architects, and people who are on the ground every day delivering circular services. So each and every one of you play a really important role in the transition to a circular economy and can help make this concept of a circular hub possible. If I haven't met you before, and there's a few unfamiliar faces to me, my name is Kat Heinrich. I'm a director and principal consultant at Rawtech, and it's my absolute pleasure to be moderating today's discussion all about circular hubs and how we accelerate them in South Australia. It is well known that current practices for production and consumption are unsustainable and are contributing massively to climate change. And the more stuff that we buy and consume, the bigger our footprint. Now, as citizens, we can reduce our footprint through many things, such as repairing rather than replacing, and borrowing or renting instead of buying new. But the reality is not many people do that. And the reason for that is we face many barriers. We're all really busy people. It can be inconvenient to try to do the right thing, and it's not the social norm. So education alone is not enough to transition to a circular economy and to move to these more sustainable lifestyles. What we need is to consider our built environment and how this built environment can include the amenities that we need to make these things business as usual, to make them convenient, easy, accessible. In today's panel, we'll be unpacking this topic in more detail. And to do this, I'm joined by an amazing group of panellists. We have Shani Wood, lead educator at Green Industries SA. Please give her a round of applause. Welcome, warm welcome. We have James Raphael, creative director at Feeney Marketing. Daniel Mee, founder of Recycle Plastics Panels. And you're probably wondering why Ken Long is on the panel and not in my seat today. Normally, I'm told this is the first time that someone has kicked him out of the moderating position. And the reason why I asked that, because we've been collaborating on this event, was because I feel like Ken has a lot of great knowledge to share. And I really wanted the opportunity to pick his brain, given his expertise in the built environment and aspects like that. So that's why he's on that side tonight instead of this side. So just quickly before we kick off, just by show of hands, who here is new in terms of wasn't in the earlier workshop about circular hubs? Just put them high. So we've got about, a handful of people. So just for your benefit, we did talk about what circular hubs are, and I don't want to repeat it too much at length for all those people who spent an hour and a half talking about it earlier today. But I'd really like to just define what we're talking about so we're all on the same page. So to do this, originally I was going to get Shani to unpack it, but Shani had a better idea. She said, let's test the audience. Who was listening? So I might start, David, picking on you. This is the real challenge for David is to keep it to less than 10 words. So, David, how do you define a circular hub?
A place where people can come together and understand what is required for transition to a living, I guess, within our balance of materials and resources.
Thank you. So, give him a round of applause, please. So, exactly that. But I want to add to that. It's a physical location. It's like a one-stop shop, a convenient location where residents can participate in circular activities. They can repair their items. They can donate their secondhand clothing. They can participate in a makerspace or all these types of things. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about circular hubs. So I'll start with a question for the lovely Shani. Shani, you have a background working in local government, and you've recently transitioned to state government. And in your role, you've been trying to transition the community to more sustainable practices. Why do you think that circular or community circular hubs are needed to facilitate this transition?
I think the main one for me, like we spoke about, Kat, is if we really want to reach net zero, we need to start thinking about how we produce, consume and discard stuff. So we can't shop on Temu and Shein. If we do shop on Shein, we want to look after that Shein t-shirt and repair it when possible. So it's really important that we provide our community access to these services so they can start living a lifestyle where best practice around circular economy services and goods is just the standard. It's normal to go shop secondhand. Secondhand is the first option. Not going to Kmart is the first option. So these circular hubs help create a culture within our community that will help us transition to true circular economy.
And so, as we know, and we did this mapping exercise earlier today, and you can see the South Australia map just there with all the sticky notes on it. There's a lot of circular services and amazing repair cafes and library of things that already exist in South Australia. So what's preventing people from actually using these services, Shani?
It's convenience, really. People don't want to go out of their way. Study in Europe, people are only willing to travel 7 minutes to donate their clothing. So I would assume that it's somewhat similar to metropolitan behaviours when it comes to circular goods and services. People are used to getting things right now and they want it to be really easily accessible. So 1, hard to get to. 2, hardly ever open. There are quite a few repair cafes around Adelaide, but they're only open once a month on a morning, which isn't easy to get to. And they're exclusive locations as well. So we've spoken about men's sheds. Half of us here aren't men. And some of those men's sheds, you also have to be like a Vietnam vet. So that increases the exclusivity even more. So there's lots of barriers, and that's where circular hubs come on board.
Yeah, so it's about that all-inclusive, accessible space. And so in your previous role in local government, you looked at circular hub concepts. Can you share some insights on what could a circular hub look like for a local council?
So at Holdfast Bay, we all know where Holdfast Bay is, so Glenelg, Brighton. So Holdfast Bay, medium to high social economic area, we have 5 community centres, which is actually quite a lot for a small council. So a lot of those community centres are just sitting there and not being used. So how do we activate these community centres, and not just activate them, but activate them for all? So we worked with a lovely Kat from Rawtech and came up with a concept and action plan around what community centres would be useful. And we looked at 1, Holdfast Bay Community Centre in Hove. So the great thing about Holdfast Bay, 1, a community centre in Hove, is close to public transport, easy to get to. 2, there's Minda across the road, so people with disability can easily access the location. 2, there's an aged care facility across the road. 3, there's a school next door. So that's really convenient location for a lot of people. It's within a second-hand shop precinct, so you're supporting the local economy as well. So yeah, we were looking around how can we activate these community centres and what model would work. Obviously, it's an investment. So when we looked at the figures, it was about $250,000 investment with state government funding to get the infrastructure for the whole circular hub. But ongoing, you need to fund an FTE. So it's really important that you don't rely just on volunteers. You need someone there to organising the day-to-day stuff that you can't expect people to do for free. And
what kind of activities do you foresee running out of these types of local government circular hubs?
Yep. So you would have your repair cafe, your maker space, an education space, a community garden, which you could also link to a Ghana bush tucker garden with name placing, an education centre so people can come along and learn how to mend their clothes, learn how to repair white goods. You'd also have a library of things like we spoke about before, where instead of buying the power drill for 13 minutes use for the life, rent it. And I think, a resource hub drop-off points. There's a lot of things that people put in bins that shouldn't go in bins. So we want to get them out of bins. We want to make sure the batteries aren't going in bins. We want to make sure fluorescent light globes aren't going in bins. Glasses can be reused. So one-stop drop-off point for these tricky waste items.
And from the council's or a council's perspective, just in general, what's the appeal to councils in kind of stepping into this space and developing circular hubs? Like, why would they bother?
Councils are actually quite competitive. They like to be the first, so that would be 1 motivation. But 2, obviously the environmental benefits, and 3, the community benefits. So loneliness is a real issue at the moment in our post-COVID world. 1 out of 5 young people say they're often and always lonely. Spoke about this earlier. And if you're lonely, you're 5 more times likely to get depressed. So we need to have more community connectivity and access to skills and knowledge to be talking to people in the community and feeling like you belong.
Thank you.
Community, environment, economy as well, because you're helping act as a catalyst to boost local development in your community around circular economy.
Yeah, and I was just sharing earlier in the session about, the benefits of reuse, and we just recently launched a study in Sydney on Monday. A lot of the focus across local governments has been around recycling. And whilst recycling is good, you'd lose a lot of the value of the embodied, energy, water, etc. So by reusing through these hubs, you're actually driving much better environmental, economic and social benefits. I should just say as well, audience, everyone, you have the opportunity to ask questions during this panel. So I'm going to ask some more questions. I'm going to go to James next. But whilst I do, if there's any questions you have, please start thinking about them, because I will turn to you. And if you're not forthcoming, I will force you to ask questions. It's too much fun. James. So first of all, James, welcome.
Thank you.
I think this is your first ASBN event. This is my second, and I'm already moderating, so that's pretty good. No, joking. We're moving up quick. No. Just to begin with, just because people might not be familiar with Feeney marketing, can you please provide a bit of background about Feeney, what you do, and in particular in the circular economy space?
Yeah, 100%. So a bit of background about Feeney is we really do work within that market research all the way through to brand development and then communication sort of space, as opposed to anything too deliberately tactical at the end of that funnel. So my background personally, which you might not actually know, Kat, is I spent 5 years of my life living in Vancouver in a building called the Vancouver CoLab, which was a makerspace come artist residency come community centre. And then from there, that was actually after I had graduated as an architectural graduate at Adelaide University. So a lot of this is really central to some of my values, I suppose. And coming back from Vancouver, coming back to Adelaide, having a look at where those two things overlap. And there were some really great elements of the utopia of what existed within the CoLab, but for it to genuinely be sustainable, it needs to be viable, and that longevity has to be built in. So there has to be that commercial overlap. So what we do at Feeney now, something you're probably familiar with is Direct Collect, the at-home recycling service that comes straight to you. That's something that we developed. We're working with those recycling partners in Oakland to develop RECO, the recycling co-op, which again deals a lot more with that material management side of recycling, and still connected to the circular economy in terms of reducing contamination with the objective of keeping materials in use at their highest value. That's really the through line. And then we also then work with industry to help understand what their end user actually understands about what they make, so that they can make accurate decisions as their product actually relates to the circular economy. So something I've been doing with Mark recently is a project around plastics manufacturing. So how we can go about minimizing waste on one side, but also building circularity into the products for plastic containers, because the problem that we're sort of seeing there is there's a misunderstanding within the audience segment about what the circular economy is and what circularity actually looks like in terms of understanding how to keep something in use from that, I guess, for lack of a better word, sharing is caring as a mindset. So we sort of go to the audience and understand how much do they value about sharing is caring, and then how much do they think that caring is cool. And so once we understand that psychography, we can start to understand how we can communicate to them in language that they will respond to, and that really determines how effective any of these programs will be or any of these buildings will be.
So that brings me to my next question. There might be a huge investment in circular hubs. Say the dream came true and we had all these amazing facilities built with repair cafes and maker spaces, etc. The question is, how do we design them in a way to make sure that people turn up and use them? They have high visitation rates, they have high use rates. What does your research tell us about what's important to consumers to get people to these facilities?
Yeah, access, convenience, confidence, those are the big ones. So it has to be convenient. Everything has to be convenient these days. We live in a pretty short attention span and instant gratification sort of time for human civilization. But if it's not relevant to them, that's probably the big outlier. So in terms of doing your research, when you engage with your community, something that I guess a lot of people in this room would understand is thoroughly doing a needs analysis. So making sure that what you're looking to put in place overlaps as much as possible with the needs of the community that it's there to serve. So it's not necessarily about how sophisticated the building is, or, you know, and technology is a great way to actually streamline a lot of that stuff. But it's really about making sure that it feels relevant. And then to sort of put the brand man hat back on is that relevance needs to then be popularized, and to make it popular, it needs to be cool. And so for it to be cool, you need to have your advocates and your ambassadors who are going to be the ones that sort of be the crowd that draws the crowd. And so you've got to build all of that in from the get-go, rather than doing things in a silo, over to one side, in a vacuum, and then sort of determining afterwards whether or not it's going to be effective.
Can you break that down a little bit more? So can you give an example of that, whether that's direct collect or something more vague, more conceptual?
Absolutely. I think, you know, when we do our AIO, so activities, interests and opinions, that's sort of how we build psychography of any audience. That's where you sort of overlap a lot of how people think with the demographic that they represent. So a good example of that, if you were to build a repair cafe, the best place to sort of, you know, get most value out of that would be to pair an area where you've got an aging population with, you know, grown adult children who've abandoned all of their pink bikes with streamers, and then overlap that with an area or a demographic population where they're going to sort of have that demand and that need. So by really, so you're not going to get a lot of visitation from an older, you know, I guess a different socioeconomic vicinity with an established audience for that stuff that's more tailored to the younger audience. It's probably the same with toy libraries. And again, when you start to come back with that sharing is caring model, it's really understanding what the needs are of that community that's going to be serving it. Because as you mentioned, people aren't going to travel all that far, but our research does tell us that as long as there's no cost impost, they're more than happy to put their time into it. If you can clearly sort of explain to them where there's value in what you're offering and making it relevant to them.
We've talked about before, James, is the importance of transparency and what happens to materials. So can you touch on that a little bit about, it really plagues the industry that we work in, because you may be aware of a lot of media reports about what actually happens to recycled materials. Do they actually get recycled? And that has flow-on effects. But James, can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, the material flow stuff is really fascinating. And then the mainstream understanding of that and the misconception side of that, we work pretty hard to combat that. There's a very popular frozen yogurt company in Adelaide, South Australia, that's currently running a graphic that is designed to almost make it appear circular, promoting the use of their single-use packaging and how that's then composted, and then there's strawberries that are grown from that compost and then sold at the cafe. The problem there is that their new packaging isn't made out of those strawberries, and you could probably have grown those strawberries without needing to put their packaging in the compost. And so you've got greenwashing 101 happening, and that pretty much for those in the know who are the most engaged and active part of this audience, they sort of just turn away from it and say, this stuff is being greenwashed into oblivion and there's almost no coming back from it. So when we do the data, when Mark, and I were sort of looking at stuff around packaging, you start to see what polymer lined paperboard looks like in terms of material flows. The recovery rate is less than 1% if we're being really, really generous. So you've then got to start to look at how do you get pro-plastic about recycled polypropylene when it's really harmless, it's really reusable, it stays at such a high rate of value, when the whole audience just wants to believe that this thing's just going to go away. So that's where circularity needs to start to uplift in terms of comprehension, in terms of maintaining value, because you actually don't want it to go away. You don't want it to break down too quickly. You don't want it to diminish and down cycle. So we're now starting to get to that point where recycling, downcycling, upcycling, and the circular economy all sort of sit within this other basket, and people are sort of picking and choosing which they want to be involved with. But in terms of what we're all trying to achieve, it's minimize waste. So that's kind of the through line.
So some of the messages I'm taking from what you've shared is know your audience, design for the user in mind, and make sure you're very transparent about what's happening with the materials and what you're doing with them, because we don't want to greenwash. And so that those principles can be applied to circular hubs. There's no point doing activities at circular hubs if they're just, around, like making it sound nice when it's not actually achieving real practical outcomes.
Yeah,
so
it's got to be effective.
It's got to be effective. All right. I'd like to bring Daniel into the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And
No
I had the pleasure of meeting, Daniel, I think it was about a month ago at the Circularity Accelerator program. So yeah. Just to kick off, Daniel, can you share with the audience what kind of work you do, and in particular the sorting party concept that you do?
Yeah. So I started a little while ago pretty new to this area, and my background does not reflect what I'm doing at all. I sort of fell into it just because I was interested. One day I wanted to put some cabinets in my shed, but I wanted to make it out of recycled stuff, and in particular a recycled plastic panel. And in searching for that, I couldn't find it, and I, in doing so, found out it's actually pretty easy to do yourself. But the easy part then follows into the hard part, and that's making it a bigger kind of thing and making it all work on many different aspects. So we're talking about circular hub, and I wasn't really even thinking I wasn't trying to do a circular hub, but I realized a circular hub is what I kind of needed to actually have this work. And when you're recycling, every recycler has the problem of contamination. So as soon as you go, if there was no contamination in recycling, we'd have billion-dollar companies about, because contamination is what prevents it from being virgin material. And so you have to decontaminate. And I didn't have $27 million to build my own materials recycling facility. I was so close at 20 million, but you know. Where was I? I got distracted. So I didn't have the money. I didn't have the money for that. So I had seen on the East Coast they're doing a recycling party as part of the thing. I thought, I'll give that a go, and I contacted my local community centre, and they said, yeah, we're in for this. So I brought a whole lot of clean plastic lids and things like that the community had donated. And they brought their own to the community centre. And then we had a bunch of tubs, and we had a bunch of conversations about it. First we had a meal. That was important. I really wanted to have a time where we just kind of rush from work, or we just rush from somewhere, and I didn't want people to have to worry about making food and all that sort of stuff. So we have a meal. And at the Port Environment Centre 1, the meal was soup and bread that was made from local cafe next door, and that really good synergies there. And then we get into a couple of hours of sorting out the lids, and everyone thinks, okay, put the yellows over here, put the blues over here. The first thing I say to them is, colour makes no difference in this process, and I want you to get that out of your head right now. And they all go, because it's about the type. There's multiple different types of plastic, and sorting by type is actually quite difficult. So we've over a few trial and errors, we've managed to get it formulated to be nice and easy. And the reason why it had to be nice and easy is because so many different types of people are coming. We've got, like, my 12-year-old stepped up and started coming and helping out and directing traffic. We've got the elderly, we've got people with special needs. They're all coming and melding together towards a common goal. And it actually stuns me each time 20, 30 people turn up. I'm like, you sure you want to be here? Like, this is crazy. Like, thanks guys for helping out. And the community centres are loving it, because that's what they're there for, is to bring the community in, people that have never been there before. The main place where I started was near me, which is the Pasadena Community Centre. Really great vibe, really great place. And they have a book where you have to say where you came from and all that sort of thing. And yeah, people are like, oh, this place is great. And what the community centres like about it as well is that they're able to, because they've got the posters and everything around, they go, oh, you've got a pickle class in on Saturday. I might join in on that as well. So it really does start that conversation about recycling, also bring people together to talk about other community side of things.
So Daniel, one of the things that James talked about was the importance of, what happens to the material. So can you share your example, Daniel? So we're not just sorting it for the sake of sorting it. What actually happens with the materials you sort?
On the onset, I want to say we need to stop the plastic tap. A lot of times if I'm talking about this, people are like, we don't want plastic. I go, yeah, neither do I. The problem is that if we were successful and turned off the tap, there's still a stack of it out there. I had a stat of 997 million CDs were produced in 98, at the height of the CD music production, and that's nearly 1 billion CDs. They've dropped that down to 1%, and that's still 37 million CDs being produced today, like this year. But as we know, we've all got a DVD library. I met someone at Hawthorne Dean who was downsizing. They're empty nesters and they're going down to a smaller house. But she was an avid movie collector and she had DVDs.
Was it my mum?
No.
They downsized recently from Glenalta, but
This is close.
Maybe.
Might be. So what she did was got all the DVDs out, and she still loved her movies, so she got all the DVDs out, the discs out, and put them in a case. But sent me a message and saying, "Oh, I heard what you're doing. Can you take some of the plastic?" So that was going to landfill, because which bin tells you don't put this stuff in landfill, and that's because it needs to be dismantled. The plastic cover needs to be ripped off. The paper needs to be taken out. In her case, the discs were already out. But that needs to be taken out if that doesn't happen as well. So it's a big process.
So the process, once you finish the sorting, what happens next with the plastics?
Yeah. So we've got all the things sorted, and then I might choose a plastic depending on what the application will be, and shred it. I stumbled there because I'm hitting on the medical waste industry who have tiny bits of plastic. So if it's tiny enough, I won't have to worry about shredding it. But yeah, shredding it if it's like a CD, DVD and all that sort of thing. And then when you've got the $20 million, you can buy the big infrastructure to make massive panels. But what I do is grab a cafe who's upgrading and grab their commercial sandwich press and heat up the plastic, melt it, and here's some examples. So this is a DVD case. It's a black DVD case. This one just recently got CNC'd to test something, which you might see tomorrow night. That's the clear DVD case. And this is polypropylene. So when you're talking about, when you want to talk about getting your materials recycled, this is polystyrene. Most people are familiar with the expanded polystyrene, which is a headache. But CD cases, VHS cases, cassettes and audio cassettes, they're all polystyrene as well. And also the tops of coffee cup lids, which are being phased out. And so I had a couple of cafes call me up and say, we've got all these coffee cup lids that we're not going to be using anymore. Can you recycle them? And so, yeah. So this is a clear CD case. And it's a bit see-through. But very strong like glass. Sorry, what? Colour? No, well there is, oh yeah, sorry, yeah. If I wanted to have a mosaic sort of thing, then yeah. But I got the CDs, all the CDs were either, they were clear. And so it wasn't too hard to sort. I just sorted that.
So Daniel, what's the end market for this product?
Well, I say to people, what would you have bought MDF or plywood for?
Okay.
With the only other caveat, because it's plastic, you can't put it installed next to a heat source like a splashback to a cooktop.
Yep.
And the other thing is I wouldn't want it outside because they haven't been UV stabilized. But even UV stabilized, you still can get nano micro plastic runoff into soil and things like that. So there are some recyclers doing this that are making bricks for veggie gardens and all that sort of thing. So I know it's being done. I'm just not too comfortable with it just yet.
Yeah, okay. So
more because I'm not.
Can we give a round of applause? Brought some show and tell. Thank you, Daniel. And that's a really nice example of how the community can be engaged in an activity that helps to get waste and actually turn it into a resource and actually have an end market for it, because that's the really important part.
And while while the camera's on me, I wanted to show Coca-Cola that your lids, you say on there, please recycle me, you can recycle them. That's the little recycle logo on there.
Nice.
Pressed into the...
You should post it to them. All right. Yeah. Next to Ken. Ken. All right. So we've been talking a lot so far about community circular hubs, so circular hubs that set up in council areas. But I'm keen to talk about the opportunity to develop circular hubs across building developments like Tonsley's, Bowden's, Villawoods and those type of things, so that when you live there, it's easy to participate in circular activities. For example, you might have a shared shed where you can borrow a tool instead of having to own it. You might have a used donation bin for donating your textiles, because a lot of people living in these areas might not have a car, so it might be harder for them to drive to these community centres. So my question for you, Ken, is what's the current state of play when it comes to providing these circular amenities in high density and mixed use developments? Is it something that's common or uncommon, or what's the current status in South Australia?
I think, well, generally in South Australia, from a shared amenity included in a development, it's probably not very common. Mainly from the private market, they're just reacting to land and a house or an apartment, a unit for sale. And that can be extended to even like commercial developments as well. Even though it might make a lot of social sense, and to be honest with you, from maximizing, what do you say, like sellable or lettable area, it makes sense that you get those spaces that were made to house a laundry, house a vacuum cleaner, all those kind of stuff. Could be more room for someone's bedroom, could be more room for someone's living room. That being said, that's not convenient, right? So in a lot of people's eyes, and in generally a lot of individual households, we're conditioned to think that we need to have space for all of our personal things rather than a shared sort of like equity. So, I mean, look, it's interesting for me to kind of try to put on this perspective, because I've kind of worked myself in an area that, obviously I work for private development as well as construction. But I always thought, I'd consider myself a man of the people. But in this kind of instance, thanks, Dan. In this kind of instance, just trying to provide that perspective, there is a market that they need to make sure that their product satisfies. And this area of shared amenity is definitely not in the regular return on investment, or where I think our conversation will end up going is part of the brief that they need to provide back for being able to develop somewhere or make money somewhere.
So given that's the current state of play, are there any types of facilities or types of developments where the shared facilities make more sense and, people are more willing to participate them?
Oh yeah, and we kind of do it on a regular basis whenever, we take a staycation or go somewhere else. I mean, one of the best places for shared amenity and an uplift of shared amenity is hotels. And in hotel offerings, they tried to showcase, look at all the shared amenity. We have these kind of gyms, we have these kind of things. What if that was flipped to be able to create domestic life amenity? Now, where that would end up playing quite well in a residential standpoint is actually not where we have situations where, so currently, if you're gonna be in a planned development or a multi-unit residential apartment building, you're most likely either gonna be in a strata, or even if you're in a Torrance title, kind of like townhome situation, you might have some shared sort of areas that still fall under a strata. Everyone has their kind of piece of the pie. And then you have to share management, which ends up becoming, we want to make sure the management is so low that we don't actually have the ability to pay for or facilitate through exchanges of money for these various kind of service or upkeep. Now, in a model generally that's booming right now is build to rent. And build to rent, in some ways, I'm a little bit conflicted, because in some ways it creates a lot of good opportunities for sustainability. One owner cares about how the building performs, which means it wants to reduce its operational bit. And as a corporate, you want to reduce the amount of emissions coming from it because you're gonna have to report on those. And your build to rent is much more interesting if you have shared amenities, things like laundries, gyms, dog washing facilities, end of trip facilities, all those kind of things that can help facilitate more communal living for the loneliness bit. But again, on the other side, there's no individual wealth, because property is part of a story of everyone's individual wealth, so to speak. I mean, that's the story that's told to us. So while there's a lot of sustainability benefits that you can kind of see, because now you're not paying strata fees, right? In a build to rent scenario, you're just paying rent. You're not thinking about council fees, you're not thinking about strata fees, you're also not thinking about a mortgage, but your rent is going to include all of that, as well as whatever else you're being provided to, which, again, when you go to a hotel, you're paying all of that for all those kind of like amenities. So in some ways, in a project, it's a little bit, we talked about like convenience, but one, if there's any sort of shared amenity or trying to leverage things for a community hub or space for a community hub, one, a developer or and a developer can be private, public, community. They need to know what is that, how it's going to operate. So they need clarity on that, which generally isn't there, as well as convenience of being able to say like, oh, you have a model set for us. We're just going to plug that into whatever we're kind of developing. So yeah, even property developers want convenience on what they want to plug and play.
Okay, that's interesting insight, Ken. Thank you for sharing that. It's interesting. I like your thought process there about potentially an opportunity with build to rent. And when I think about it, at the moment, if you have buildings, they have a lot of storage cages, right? That takes up a lot of space, even though they're teeny tiny storage cases that you stack up, and you've got to be very careful when you open them.
And you pay a lot when you pay in for it.
You pay a lot for them. But with the example that we presented in the workshop, for those of you who didn't join, there was an example from Sweden where it's a shared shed and there's no strata involved with managing the shared shed. It's a subscription fee that you pay. And basically you tap your card, or I'm not sure the exact mechanics. A company owns it and runs it, and you can borrow all these irregular use things like a pressure washer that you need to use hardly ever, or a power drill. So you don't need to own your own of all those. So therefore you don't need the space, you don't need the storage space to store all that. So imagine those types of things are more space efficient and they don't require the additional management, and they potentially improve cost of living outcomes because you don't need to buy all these things individually. So I think at large the opportunity is not there at the moment, but there may be particular cases, and maybe with the right sets of circular hub activities, it might become appealing for that market.
Yeah, and look, there's another kind of aspect that if you're thinking a lot on finances, right? Because being a sustainability professional, I also know that the environment sort of tug is sort of limited at times, and I think even for the environmental sector, sustainability sector, we need to be a lot more nuanced with what opportunities, financial opportunities, does this really come with. Now, a lot of times, like we do talk about, I just mentioned that you could almost substitute space for what could have been storing something for living. But anytime you save space and like you don't replace it, like so you just make homes more efficient by not having that space at all. Every square meter costs a lot. So how can we also get in this conversation of what's the trade-off here as well? It's like if we want to have more affordable homes, it's not just about affordability of knocking them up quickly or materials and things like that. Sometimes it might just come to this space. How much space are you actually building? And I know, and look, that's not a popular way of thinking. I'm just putting it out there that can be part of the conversations that we have with other organizations, putting products out there, that if you actually do have that amenity, you have the availability to reduce space, which might reduce cost.
Which leads me to my next question. Given that, it's these kind of amenities are not happening already, like they're happening a little bit, but it's not common. What are the levers that state government or councils might want to pull to provide incentives for developers to make sure these circular amenities are part of standard builds for multi-use, high-density kind of developments?
Yeah, I think so. some of the conversations that we had, kind of going over this, is could you actually mandate that? Now, I think whenever you say anything around mandating, look, like we're talking about mandating of energy efficiency, that doesn't really ring kind of true. So I think especially with community uplift, it really has to kind of go down to carrots, and what are the greater incentives. And look, one of the best incentives is to be able to get land to develop on a good price. That you know that you'll be able to, and of course, be able to make return on investment. So if that's going to be the case, then what is the exchange with whoever is developing that, whether it's a once again, private, public, or a partnership? Those guardrails have to be there. So can aspects of circular hubs be part of a brief for the ability to develop on a particular piece of land? Now, that is a place of, once again, it's almost like a planning control, but then inflicted by the organization allowing for the land to be developed. I think that's probably the biggest carrot / like kind of putting it into a contract.
I like it, Ken.
But
Yep.
at the same time, one of the biggest parts of pushback in development generally is you put this requirement out here as for it to satisfy, but you have no way of articulating how we're actually gonna get that done. So if we can actually work, once again, this is where I'm talking about like convenience of, if you actually are able to, like, even through this kind of discussion or this workshop, we have some sort of model that can be plugged and played. That is way more about like, okay, now that you've articulated to me how the operational costs are gonna be there, this is what I could have made from rent, but now that you're giving me a deal on the land, I'll try to see how that works out long term. Then it can be sort of that can be part of like the discussion.
Thank you. We had a question.
I'm in the private development space, residential land development space. I guess, really simply, I'm just thinking, can a commercial hub pay a commercial lease? So if you have a really well-run commercial hub with a point of difference that is like the one you showed in Sweden earlier on, my gut feeling is they would be able to pay a commercial lease. So if I'm a developer, so we've got a development, and I love the idea of this. I do anything to support community, but I have shareholders and investors, and I have to go back, and even as passionate as they are about community, the reality of development is the margins have got so tight in building construction, in development. We pay so many levies. We're getting to the point where as developers, we can't keep up with the housing affordability crisis. We can't keep up with the rental crisis. I'm on the Urban Development Institute of Australia, so I'm absolutely supportive of everything you're saying, but it has to have a commercial model. So if you have a really well-run, I'll say again, community circular hub that has a point of difference and can sell product, recycled products, sell wood, beautifully constructed recycled tables, beautifully constructed recycled plastic materials, driven by artists, etc., in a beautiful space with a beautiful community-led cafe, can it pay a commercial lease? Because I'll go and build you buildings in developments if I can prove up to my investors and say, list, because all they want to get back is a commercial as a lease, So those investors behind the scenes just want to know that they can, the developer needs to return a profit to its investors to make anything work. So Newnham up in Mount Barker, which is my passion project, I'll build you a circular hub tomorrow if we can work up a model that I can say to the investors in the project, it'll give you a commercial lease. And I think I think it's very possible.
I might be uniquely positioned to answer this. Yeah, James. Sorry, what was yours? Sorry, what was your name? Olivia. So I think the statute of limitations has passed, so I can give you the ins and outs of how we set up the Vancouver CoLab. So it was 2013, 2014, and Kickstarter, we were the first 6 or 7 projects on a platform called Kickstarter, a group of makers. I was a leather worker. Through that, I brought in our neighbours who were cobblers. So, I mean, the whole building was like a glorious game of pass the parcel. If we weren't sharing materials, we were sharing knowledge. And we were the custodians of the building effectively. We lived there. We were the primary residents. So I think the commitment to the lease in Australian terms, because it was all square footage, so we would have probably had 300 square metres top 2 floors, so 600 total. And all upstairs was artist residencies, the actual live-in suites that we had, the bathrooms, those amenities, etc. Downstairs was all makerspace and membership-based. So it was definitely viable. I mean, we paid for that at an insane profit. Like, I think it ended up coming down to probably $900 a month out of pocket we were to live and work there. And that was on a building that I think was running at approximately an $90,000 a year lease. Obviously, it was pretty run down. By the time we left, so that was in a light industrial area, and it was all illegal. Like we set it up ourselves. But yeah,
Being recorded.
like I said, I think the statute of limitations is well and truly gone. But it was one person who was willing enough to actually sign that lease from the person who was actually renting it from the next door neighbour, who was a scrap metal yard, and it was all very much about the cause and everyone coming together. So their name was on the dotted line, and then we all just sublease or paid membership fees. But it was 100% viable. We were there 5 years. It's still going today. I know since then they've built the cannery, which was a dedicated, well-zoned version of that. They've built the Bowery. They've built so many now. They all look exactly the same. They're beautiful. They're very modular, high ceilings. It suits the identity that people want. 100%. Yeah. So I think the pillars of it, I believe the pillars of it were occupation, activation, and then participation. So if it wasn't that, if you weren't occupying it, you were just participating in something, or you were having an activation there, whether it be a pop-up where you were actually building a tiny house within a premises and people would learn new skills, and that would make that business viable. And all of those things were emerging, and it was a great melting pot for ideas, and that's that sharing is caring approach. It really works both ways. It's not just about the stuff, it's about the knowledge.
Hmm.
It's all about zoning regulation for sure.
Hang on. This is a great conversation. I'm just okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about that. Someone sets. I think once someone sets the tone, once there's that proof of concept, like anything all designers can relate to, then the trend will follow. Then people see that there is a commercial upside and a practical.
Okay, Ken.
And then just a quick add on that one from even commercial viability is that, and once again, that kind of goes back to like, can we actually have a model that can be evaluated by the people that are open to creating the space for it? But that model can also come, like if we were talking about, does government need to support this? Those kind of spaces are places where there potentially should be carved out funding and yearly budget to things that that can be proven. And then if circular economy is component of, and this is a little bit, it's not directed at you, Shani, but from a state government kind of like standpoint, organizations that are trying to come up with the solutions, back them with the annual funding, not just one grant. I'm talking about you are helping us deliver on our strategic state or local government platform. We see the value in that, but, and this is a little bit of a bugbear, is that the people that unload the budgets don't always talk to their sustainability teams. So how do we actually bridge that gap to make sure that people that want to come with quite literally have coming up with solutions are able to actually make some of that ongoing alignment with government values? That's why that public purse goes into an annual funding business case. And then that can help make sure that there is security for anyone that does development to make sure, hey, I've developed this, we've put a risk on this as well, a financial risk on this, which means we need a financial return on investment. But their model includes something that is a consistent funding, so I can have them as a tenant.
I honestly think, and I mean, this is easy for me to say, hard to implement, but if you think about, I mean, to Shani's earlier point about the importance of these spaces for mental health, and for the cost of living savings from, you know, being able to save money buying secondhand rather than new, or not, or buying, or sharing things instead of buying things. Think about all the government programs, all the money spent on all these separate things that we do, all these different programs. It's as though some of these circular hubs could fulfill some of those, you know, prevent a lot of the mental health problems. They can prevent a lot of the cost of living crisis. They're not the solution to everything, I'm not saying that, but they can cross so many different outcomes that the government's trying to achieve. But it requires foresight, it requires leadership to understand that by investing in these kinds of facilities, you're actually delivering so many benefits to the community. It's really clear to me.
But work with professionals to help quantify that value.
Yes.
So that social value can be quantified by market analysis, it can be quantified by economists. So part of this circular hub thing cannot just miss the part around like, oh, these are great. But then somewhere down the line, someone's going to ask for what are the hard numbers that I can help figure out in my mathematical brain? Because someone with a mathematical brain is going to end up being the one that stamps an okay. So we need to play that game with them.
So in the Holdfast Bay Community Centre model, it was that investment of about $250,000 matched from council and someone like Geetha. And then the ongoing would be just paying for the FTE, so maybe $100,000. State government does have grants where I can't really speak on behalf of green industries because they're not open yet. Council modernisation and recycling infrastructure grants, these would fit well with a circular hub. They're not open yet, but they will be open next financial year. So if you work with an organisation or an organisation that are interested in the circular hub, please flick me an email and I'll let you know as soon as the grants are open.
That I've come across and been really challenged with is that private developers will often not get funding because we're seen to be, you know, able to fund everything ourselves. And so something like this, which has true community benefit, we sort of end up in a bit of a pickle because it does need an element of, it's for community benefit. And so I think there is a commercial model which would support, you know, if I've got to build $1 million building and, you know, I've got to turn the lights on and all those things and keep it maintained, you need to get return on investment. But then there is an element of, I think, government funding that's needed because it has community benefit, but that's where private developers just seem to, you know, you have to be a not-for-profit or you have to be. So is it a case of forming sort of community associations to run these things as well that can get that funding?
You are defining this business as a normal business. So in this case, for me, what are you offering is exactly what another developer is offering me, a commercial space. What are we trying to bring here? It's more like a social aspect. And from my experience, once a developer finished a residential building apartment complex, he or she is gone. That's it. It's up to the businesses which are coming and they are like trying to do something there with the space. So my question is, how can we in the future for new type of developments, if we have like high density buildings, how can we have that space which, for instance, yourselves as developers will be built? Possible you might get some grants, I'm not saying you will, but in the end it will have its own title, it will be separately, it will be possible to sell it. So for me, really, I don't see your risks here. Yeah, but this is what I'm saying. Once the building is completed, you're gone. If you're doing building for rent, that's a little bit different story. So I feel like we are just starting with this idea. We are not there yet. We cannot show you the profits, but we
I'm not looking for any profit. I'm saying if I was to build your building and
yes.
own the building, okay, so
Yeah.
Or if I own any building and I want to lease it,
Yes.
so I can keep the building running.
Yeah.
Can these business, well, they're not businesses, but community social parts, they generate an income, can they pay the rent? I think that's what you're saying. Yes, they can. Yeah.
Now, I am aware of the time. We have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to do a very quick at the back. We had a very quick. Well, I hope it's a very quick question.
Not good, Katie.
Right. No, just it's a question, and it's a sort of target and answer. We spoke about that on the workshop, about the fact that first, when you go into this kind of building, like we've got the model of public open space we need to deliver. We've got a way to put money together and to redistribute this money and make profit from it. Whether it's a governance collaboration in between state and council, whether it's with the private sectors and the councils, it doesn't matter, but there is some scheme. Instead of just seeing it as money falling from the sky, there is some opportunities of making business of it. We know it. We obviously need some cost benefits analysis, and has been done for some other reason with the greening of the city and stuff like that. So why not about circular economy? Like putting some numbers behind and putting ourselves into it. So there are lots of exploration area that can be done into that, but the collaboration is a key thing. And we know it as government harms is like working together on it, because the benefits is not only one way, as it is not only for the private sector to the public, it's for both of it. And it's a saleable argument too. So for me, it's really important. I just want to say that it is a great place to be here and speak about it all together, because that's where it's happened. So now, more workshop and opportunities.
And I think you touched on it before. It's not just necessarily the funding has to come from green industries. There's so many other benefits to a circular hub. Like you could look at use their funding for mental health. I wish I was having this conversation a week later, because I'm actually meeting with the federal government, because they've got sustainable communities and waste hubs teams that potentially have funding for opportunities like this. So it would be a collaborative approach I see happening. But if you're interested, please just let Green Industries know so we can have those conversations before the grants come out.
We're just about to wrap up, but I just want to propose something. I mean, these conversations have been brilliant. I wish we had more time, but we've all got families to go home to, or dogs to feed, or I don't know, chickens, or what you've got. But just by raise of hands, I found this very interesting. I feel like there's so much value in hearing these different perspectives, because, you know, I come from one lens, you might come from another, you might come from another. So just by raise of hands, who is interested in being part of the dialogue going forward? Okay, wow, okay, great. I'm thinking we probably will have a chat about what that might look like, but perhaps there's another workshop or follow-up from this, because there's a lot of value in this discussion.
I actually, I just wanted to ask Daniel from a standpoint around.
Yeah, we can do a sorting party, sure.
Yeah, right after this.
Pulls out garbage bags.
Well,
I came prepared.
We kind of talked about all these things around like all these strategic kind of aspects, but it kind of made me kind of think of like, okay, like you're someone doing it.
Okay.
What's going to help you accelerate, do you think?
Yeah, that 20 million, no. It's a tough one, because it's not. I'm seeing the challenges are space and money. Like that's what everyone's going to come across is. I've found a really great guy who's got a sustainability idea, and he's currently renovating his block of land, and he may have a space for me that I can work out of, and he wants to have a community kind of aspect to it, sort of thing. But it's maybe 6 months away or next month. I don't know where it is, so it's unsure. And if that space came available, that'd be great. I'll solve the space issue. And then there's a money issue. And Tom, who started kind of like Kickstarter, but for Australia, Start Some Good, he was talking about investors and investments. And he said, you can raise 10 grand, you can raise 20 grand. It's not too hard if you've got the passion and energy to do that. And if you're at the big end of business, you can raise $500,000 because you're going to bring $500,000, and it's that one-to-one matched funding that's so common at that end of the town. You said raising 100,000 to 200,000, it's just really difficult. And what's an FTE?
Yeah.
It's roughly about like, so if someone wants to do something, I've got a day job. If I want to move to something, I need at least 100,000 just to get me and the materials I'm going to need for the year. I need 200,000 to do something like, it's that sort of ballpark there that I think is where businesses will struggle with an idea that they've come up with in their backyard.
So you need to be able to access funding of around $100,000 to $200,000 to be able to have the time to accelerate this.
Yeah.
So I just want to make that because I'm glad you asked that question, because that was actually going to be my last question, is last message on how do we accelerate this. That was your answer. James, very briefly, last.
De-risk, that touches on everything. De-risk it, because we're talking about the circular economy, so the economics of it, share the load. That's all that really is at the end of the day. De-risk it, make it attractive, focus on where the objective benefits are, and if everyone gets involved, it'll all happen.
Thank you. And Ken?
It kind of goes off of that, but then it's sort of what's the plug and play, because when you have a plug and play, you can either ask for it as a client, or you can just say, talk to these people and see how it can be worked into that model. So you got to use your points of leverage, and the plug and play thing will accelerate that. If organizations or collaboratives can take that, bam, this is what we're going to propose.
Shani, what will accelerate this space most from your perspective?
Having everyone in this room involved in future conversations. Can I say funding, even though I work for state government? I'm going to say that funding is obviously the main thing that the three models need to get this happening. Yeah.
All right. Can you please join me thanking our amazing panelists, and thank you to the audience.
Thank you. And thank you, Kat, for your amazing emceeing. You're fantastic.
It's been an absolute pleasure. We'll be in touch with next steps, and thank you for your input today. All right.